So my friend sent me these drawings that he did in high school, and he asked how he could improve them. So in this video, I'll take one and try and do just that. And we'll look at important fundamentals along the way. This video is sponsored by Clip Studio Paint. Clip Studio is great for digital painting. You can manage comic book projects of all types. It's even a full-blown animation app. But let's get back to the task at hand here today, because it's true, right? This does look more like a flat cardboard cutout than it does a real human body. Using my real human body, I'll try and mimic the flatness of that pose. I can't do it perfectly, mind you, but it's something like this. Let's rotate this around. There's nothing natural about this pose, it's awkward all the way through. Now watch this small adjustment that makes the whole pose feel natural. That was it. Let's see it from multiple angles and notice how it's totally fine now. Here's the awkward version so we can compare the two. It's a very common drawing problem to assume that the spine is straight. In actuality, the spine has quite a pronounced S-curve to it. We start here at the base of the skull, and on a skeleton, that S-curve is plain as day. Notice the angle of the spine here mimics the angle of the sternum, which is on the rib cage. This top half of the rib cage points out and up. We can take the base of the sternum and measure vertically upward and see that that point sits in front of the skull. Now, there's also thick layers of muscle built on top of the rib cage, which makes that point sit even further ahead of the skull. The shoulders, by comparison, sit way back here, pretty much in line with the back third of the skull, or the back of the ear. When the arms are at rest, they essentially cover up the spine in a profile view, leaving the front 2/3 of the rib cage fully exposed. And that's what this adjustment was all about, bringing the shoulders back and the chest out. I'm exaggerating it a bit here, but that's where these parts of the body want to be. Here in Clip Studio, I'll make a new layer, fill it with white, decrease the opacity, so that I can do a breakdown study right on top of the photograph. I'll start by simplifying the head, making sure it has both the jawline and the base of the skull. This line here defines the middle of the face, as well as the middle of the neck. That little point there is important. It's the pit of the neck, or the space between the collarbones. I'll fill in a cylinder for the base of the neck, which is also the top of the rib cage. Now this is really important. Out from the pit of the neck comes the line of action representing the sternum. I'll even put a dot there to define the base of the sternum. That's where the rib cage opens up and tapers out. A handy proportion tip, the base of the sternum is generally one head length down. Alright, so now the line of action tapers downward, and we have this directional relationship happening in the torso. Now I can construct the actual ribcage form. My center line, the sternum, really helps keep the perspective in check here. I like to even draw the backside of the ribcage like this. And now I can find the shoulders. Obviously in a 3/4 view you can't use the back of the ear trick, but you can imagine the top plane of a box. That plane really helps develop the perspective of the body. It adds to our directional relationships. I'll build out the arm now using a series of boxes. I'll explain that a little later in this lesson. For now though, just note the arm's position in space relative to the rib cage. Alright, the next important landmark is the navel. It's somewhere there. Typically the navel is 2 head lengths down. Then to finish this out, I'll draw a bowl-shaped box for the hips. Oh, and the other arm, in a 3/4 view, typically emerges from behind the torso. Alright. Practice following that lesson, and you can avoid tons of posing mistakes. I think comic book artists maximize this relationship of forms, and that's what I'm going for here, kind of a standard superhero pose. We'll follow the exact same steps. Our simplified head needs the base of the skull and the jawline. From there, we can build a cylinder for the neck. Now I really need those center lines, so there they are, including the pit of the neck. I can throw in a brow line and eye line if I want. But here we go, here's that line of action that tells me where that sternum is, and develops that all-important angle of the rib cage, as well as the subsequent downward angle of the stomach or abdomen. I'm going for an interesting perspective at the top of the shoulders here, and then from there I'll build the rib cage. Because muscles are built on the rib cage, both on the front and the back, the rib cage itself is not the final contour. From there, I'll take a guess at the navel and the belt line, and I'll soon find that I'm wrong and have to fix those. Alright, I'll put in the arm here using a interlocking series of boxes that I call the blocky chain. And here's where I find out that the navel and hips are way too low. I know this because the navel sits just below the middle of the arm, and then the hips there. And this is good. Correcting placement as you go is totally normal. What we have here is a system of checks to make sure we can make correct measurements. Here's another type of check I use. I look for a diamond type shape in the negative space between the arm and the torso. Not a perfect diamond, but something along those lines. That's another thing that revealed the torso in my drawing was too long. Here I'm imagining the entire torso as a box, and this is the side plane of that box. It's just another way to further solidify this information, and I can apply a similar basic shading to all the boxes in this construction. Doing so just helps ensure that you understand the forms that you're drawing. The front view can be a bit more difficult. I'm going to start with this arc. So what is that? Well, imagine a cylinder. If I put another arced line on that cylinder, it describes a certain perspective. So if I start with that arc, I can imagine the ribcage's perspective based on that. Here's the sternum coming down, and there's the base of the sternum. And now I can build out that ribcage with a bit more dimensional awareness. Here's a cylinder for the base of the neck. Now, the neck extends down more at the front than it does at the back, so it's kind of a tilted cylinder. I'll throw a basic head shape in there, and more importantly, establish my center lines. From here, I'll plot out the shoulders and make sure that they too have an arc connecting them. Again, that arc represents the fact that these areas point upward. Now I'm measuring where the bottom of the biceps are compared to the sternum, and I realize I have to move the sternum up a little bit. Now I can take a guess at the navel, and the belt line is not too far below that. So I've established something really good here. I've got these two directions happening, even in a foreshortened front view. And here's where that diamond trick really comes in handy. Even in a front view, you can use this. I'm using it here to help me find both the inside contours of the arms, as well as the outside contour of the abdomen. From here, you can dress them up, literally, in whatever costume you want. And because of sound fundamentals, you'll have a much higher chance of that stuff working. I think the Proco timer is great for these types of drawing sessions. I'm just looking for one particular pose here to show you. This one here. It's a generic straight up and down pose. In a way, these are harder to draw than action poses. And while this guy is impressively jacked, the pose is pretty much at rest. Despite that, we still have a lot of action to this gesture. My two directions are in place. We can travel around the ribcage at the back and get a sense for the curvature of the spine. I've got the navel and belt line in. By the way, I say belt line instead of hips because the hips are quite long. You need to know exactly where on the hips you are plotting. And in just a few minutes here, we've got a lifelike drawing of a neutral pose. All right, let's put all these tools to use in a free-form character design session. Clip Studio can be used on different types of devices, and there's a free demo if you want to check it out. I'll open a basic canvas here. I'll speed through the drawing a little bit because you've seen this multiple times. It's the exact same steps. I'm not really changing my process from study to actual production. It applies directly. I'll make a layer underneath the line layer and fill that. Then I'll set my line layer to multiply mode. In Clip Studio, you have different icons for different types of media. Pens, pencils, brushes, airbrushes, and all of your brush's relevant settings are here. So I'm making myself my own little quick custom brush, and I'll start blocking and mixing in some base colors. Now these are light tones, but still dark enough that I can get lighter with them. I'll make a new layer here above my base colors but below my line drawing, and set it to multiply. Now I'm looking for kind of a chisel-y, hard type brush, and I settle on this flat marker here. This brush is nice because it has a lot of translucency to it, so the value going down has a bit of variety, but the chisel tip provides a lot of drawing control. As for my light source, I'm imagining light coming in from roughly this direction. So this shadow layer represents parts of the body that face away from the light, or areas that are cast in shadow, like the cast shadow from the head onto the body. Minor repositioning can be done with the lasso tool at this stage, and I want to set this up for maximum contrast, so I'm just quickly darkening the background layer. At this stage, I'll merge every layer, so I'm just working on one layer now. And now I'll go ahead and fully customize another brush. And this is where Clip Studio really shines for me, how quick and easy it is to modify your own brushes. These are tablet settings here, continuous spraying is an airbrush specific setting, and stabilization to 0 just means that the stroke is entirely from my hand. You know, the software won't try and smooth out little wobbles or anything, which can be a very helpful setting in other contexts. So what I'm doing here is I've realized that my shadow pass kind of addresses individual parts of the body. I need something that has more of a meta view of the body, you know, defines very large trends of changes in direction. So I'm selecting much larger areas here, including most of the abdomen, the planes underneath the pectoralis muscles, big chunks of the forearm and triceps. And using my nice custom brush there, I'm trying to get in those big changes of direction in the torso that we saw previously. Remember, with a front view, those are foreshortened, so you can't draw them as clearly as you can from a profile or 3/4 view. So the tool I'm using to reveal them is tone, big changes in value. Now, there's an important anatomical thing to know. The base of the sternum is here. This big plane here is actually the upper abdomen, which generally faces the same direction as the sternum, which is why it's still in light. Then the direction breaks, and I've chosen to go into shadow with the rest of the abdomen and stomach area. Little tiny bits of light, like these shapes here, are just the top planes of his chiseled abs. Obviously, I've designed the lighting to show that off. And notice how much work those few steps did to this painting. I feel like it took it from a lay-in to something that could almost be finished if I had to walk away right now. Let's talk about the arm a little bit. Think of 3 chain-like blocks. This first block is for the deltoid, then out of the side of that comes another block. This is the side plane for the biceps area. Then another blocky chain link for the forearm. Notice it too has a chain-like structure as it loops its way into the upper arm. At rest, the hand can run along the same plane, and you can throw in some quick tone to emphasize the structure. Alright, let's zoom into the head a little bit here. It needs a little bit of attention. The attention it needs is not necessarily detail, but a specific delineation of light and shadow to give it clear form. So the light's coming in this way. Here's a head model with that type of light. See this overall shape of planes in light? I want to be very clear about that on my character. These are different parts of the face, but the planes all face up and toward the light. That's the most important aspect of rendering them. The opposing set of planes on the opposite side of the head, they're in shadow, and in fact I'm even editing out this little bit of light here. So they're in shadow, but they too face up. Compare that to the jaw plane, which faces more downward. That has ramifications for reflected light, which generally comes down from above. At least that's the model I'm using here. So even though the whole left side of the face is in shadow, the cheekbone planes and muzzle planes will be a bit lighter due to them receiving more reflected light. I'm not opposed to a little photo bashing. Here's a camo pattern that I found, setting the layer to overlay and giving it a layer mask, then quickly modifying one of Clip Studio's texture spray brushes, and I can kind of paint in the pattern to taste. Now, I'm not just going to use the photo, I'll flatten this down, and then just go in with a textured brush and continue the painting from there. This brush allows me to change the base texture profile, and I'll pick something that I think would work for a camouflage pattern. This is an essential step when you are photo bashing a bit to keep everything looking cohesive. I absolutely love this little feature in Clip Studio Paint. I call it the microscopic color picker. Basically, whatever color you have selected from your main color picker, this microscopic color picker will give you tiny little variations around it. This is a fantastic way to keep your colors feeling alive and varied, yet still tied to your base colors. It's a great little color hack that I just haven't seen in any other app. The 2 sliders here determine just how microscopic it all is. You know, do you want the box to display a wider range of value and saturation or narrower? You can adjust that as needed. So, of course, the question everyone faces is, when do you stop? In this case, I think I'll stop now. I could render it out more, of course, but I think it helps the lesson to show that while this piece may not be finished rendering-wise, the pose, figure structure, and lighting, those fundamentals are fully in place, and we can walk away knowing we've done a good job here. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson. Grab yourself a free demo of Clip Studio Paint. Give it a try, it's a great app. That's all for now. I'll see you in the next video.